Well, good Saturday morning to you. Welcome in. It is One-on-One with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb, Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. And full disclosure, we're recording this show on Thursday with my guest today, George Plaster.
So you're not lying about it?
I don't know what that means.
Well, oftentimes in
our
business, people end up taping things, but they don't ever tell anybody. Well, we taped this 6 weeks ago.
No, this would be Thursday, so we're fairly current with this. Yeah, I don't know, but
absolutely,
that's a good point. I just don't think, Roy's Meat Service is open from 7 a.m. to 10 o'clock every night in East Nashville. Welcome here. If you notice, I have you facing the beer case, and I face the food.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. Keep going.
When did you, in your youth, did it dawn on you that you were going to wear a microphone the rest of your life?
I knew it as a 12-year-old.
How?
I just did. I spent a childhood with a radio out on my mom and dad's patio listening to Atlanta Braves games. At the time, the Braves were on WSM, which is a 50,000-watt clear channel. And, I got to a point where I would throw a tennis ball against the wall and create my own, bouncer short could be 2, second 1, first, that's a double play. And so, I'm sure I've always wondered, what were mom and dad thinking as they watched this go on? They're probably like, our child is out of his mind.
Well, and that's been later confirmed, right?
Yeah.
But
they're not here anymore, so they don't know all of it.
The next step, though, to making it something that you're going to do your whole life.
Oh, I knew really early.
Yeah, but what was that step that pointed you, your first gig to this, or, did you answer an ad in the newspaper? What?
No, on a Friday afternoon, I had the nerve to call a small AM station, WKDA, and I got hooked up with Paul Lyle, who brought me in for an interview. And it turns out Paul Lyle was the teacher for Bob Kessling before he ever knew me, and then me. And so Kessling and I, all these years later, talk about it a lot because Paul was a really good teacher. There were certain fundamentals in radio back then that probably don't exist now, but he was the one that sort of got me guided to it. And then, by the time I was a sophomore at Vandy, I was doing Father Ryan football, which was really interesting because Bill Derrick was the head coach at Father Ryan. And, for the last 3 years, Billy Derrick, his grandson, worked with me on what we're doing now.
Well, let's promote that. Take a 20-second and promote that. 94.9, Monday through Friday.
3 to 5 p.m.
Right, right here on this station.
Yeah, how could anybody miss it?
Well, and Kelly Holcomb.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't miss it, George.
Well, thank you. And Parker Kelly has now replaced Billy, young guy who is going to make a name for himself, even if he has to deal with me.
But back to the action now. The steps along the way, how easily or difficult was it? Because I know the story. You tell it.
Well, I'm not sure where you're going.
Well, I want to get you from college to, the bankruptcy, just the story. This is your life.
Oh, God. When I got out of school, I thought everything I was going to do was play-by-play related. Because back in the early to mid-'80s, there really was very little sports talk radio around the country. There were 2 stations that were really doing it on a big-time level. It was WWWE, 3WE out of Cleveland, with the Godfather, Pete Franklin, who did 5 hours a night, and then KMOX Radio out of St. Louis, 1120 on the AM dial. And they had a young guy, about 5 years older than me, and he was the best I'd ever heard. He would do a midnight sports report, and back then nobody knew who he was, but I remember thinking, this guy's headed somewhere, Bob Costas. So I got the chance to tell Costas about a year ago, right about now. I called him, and I told him, I said, I got up the nerve late in high school to call you. And I said, I remember the phone number, 436-7900. And he goes, do you remember the enterprise number? And I said, absolutely, 9808. And he said, you're legit. Tell me why you called. And I really cracked up listening to it. But, yeah, that's sort of where it all happened. And then I took, the luckiest thing that ever happened was an association with C.M. Newton. And really it started out, Pogue, because of your school. Western Kentucky they were really frustrated that Louisville and Kentucky got all the pub in that state. And so they spent about $40,000 to buy their own production truck. They put an ad in the Nashville paper looking for a play-by-play announcer. And I'll never forget when I saw it, I was like, that's mine. And so I set up a meeting with a guy named C.M. Newton, who I did not know. And I said, I know you know some people up there, and you could really help me. And I remember he said, what do you intend to do?
Was he the coach at Vandy then?
Yeah, he'd been there
mid-80s,
a couple of years, and I didn't really know him.
Right.
This would have been early in '82. And I said, well, I'm going to do what the ad tells me to do. And he said, screw that. He said, you're going up there, and you're going to show these people that you want this job more than anybody else. And through that came the association to do Vanderbilt radio, as a sideline announcer in football, color analyst in basketball. And then Coach Newton propelled a bunch of different play-by-play possibilities. I turned one down in '85 at East Carolina. Is that right? Yeah, it infuriated him. I took one look at Greenville, North Carolina, and I said, there's no way. And then 2 years later, Memphis State happened. And, being able to have him at the top of your resume as the person pushing you, look, I'm smart enough to know that his pushing had a lot more to do with an early start than anything I did.
Local radio. This is 101 with Greg Pogue. Freeman Webb presenting. We are at Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. George Plaster, our guest. Tell me the role that Duncan Stewart played in all of this with you.
Well, it was really weird because I come back from Memphis State with no job. I'm miserable in Memphis. My parents are pissed off because I'm coming back home without a job. And Duncan tried twice to get me to be involved in his sports talk show. And I thought it was a stupid idea, and I turned him down twice. And my mom, who was really, she was all over me. You got to get a job. I basically took it to shut her up. And little did I know that, all those years later, that would be kind of a career move. And then Duncan, as you remember, this would have been September of '88. He gets on the billboard. Tennessee opens with what turns out to be an 0-6 start. And he thinks he's going to get off the billboard when they played Washington State. But Washington State had a great quarterback, Tim Rosenball. And by the end of the first quarter, it was apparent that Duncan was not going to be getting off the billboard that week. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And it was actually Memphis. It was Memphis
I think
State
when he finally did, he just fell off of it. I think that's...
You might be right. He just had a knack about promotions that was really cool. He lives out in Reno now. I talked
part
to
of the House Foundation. He did double duty, right? The mornings and then the afternoons.
Yeah, he really worked hard. What an interesting guy to work with.
Yeah, and happy that he's doing well. Him and his wife, Cheryl, out there. People don't know his real name is Stuart Leaf.
Stuart Leaf.
A lot of people don't know that. Your real name is George Plaster. My real name is Greg Pogue.
As far as I know it is.
And this is One-on-One with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb, Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. More with George coming up. From Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville, presented by Freeman Webb, One-on-One with Greg Pogue. Guest is George Plaster. I would contend that the heyday of sports talk in this market coincided with the move of the Oilers to Nashville. That's what really exploded it. Certainly this market has exploded since in so many different ways, good and bad. But that patch right there, give the lineup of who you had.
Oh, gosh. It was Joe Biddle, Willie Donick, Chad Withrow, Jacob Underwood. And
but prior to that, Dr. K.
Dr. K had been
and
a part
Nick
of
Hunter.
it. Nick Hunter. Oh, gosh.
And I need a Nick Hunter story.
Oh, gosh.
Are those FCC compliant?
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how we do this.
Why was Nick special? How about that?
Well, because, the day he passed away, we planned what I believe is the best show that I was ever a part of. And it was sort of 3 hours of This Is Your Life. And I went on at the beginning, and I warned Willie about 10 seconds before we went on the air that I didn't think I was going to make it through. And I started out with something like, we have lost our beloved Nick. And I think it shocked people, the amount of emotion that I had. He and I were very close. Now, we fought like cats and dogs on the air. And Danny Evans told me a story the day that Nick passed away, that Danny would come on the show quite a bit back then. And Nick apparently had called him and said, listen, anytime George starts ripping on Frank Wren, the former Braves general manager, go the other way. And, Danny tells me this about an hour before we go on the air that day, and I'm out in my car, and I was like, what? I said, I knew he was up to something. I said, you're a voice of reason, and if I had said the sky was green, you'd have said, no, it's black, or no, it's blue, or whatever. And I remember just thinking about, God, I wish he was alive, or I could pick up the phone and let him have it. But he and I were really close, and I think it shocked people that day. And I remember the show ended with his wife calling in. I had nicknamed her the Good Christian Woman because I said anybody married to Nick must be a Christian. And I remember she said, I've listened to this for 2 hours and 45 minutes, and Nick would never believe the outpouring of love and support for him that's been shown today on this show. And some of the really good stuff I probably couldn't tell, but that's one that I could clean up pretty good.
George Plaster with us, One-on-One with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville every Saturday morning. The summer of 2003.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Do you ever look at your own Wikipedia page?
No, but
here's what it says.
Okay.
The central figure in a public contract dispute which led to and later hampered his move to WGFX when Cumulus Media agreed to purchase WWTN from Gaylord. George said contract loophole that voided it, on and on and on. Citadel was involved. You take it from there.
Well, it involved a desire not to work for a certain group of people. And I had a terrific attorney, Jack Waddy, who in real life was, what do they call it? That's not his specialty. And I'll come up with the term in a minute. But I contacted Jack when the sale of WTN went down and said, is there any way I can get out of this? And the truth of it is there was. People assumed that it was a non-compete issue, and it wasn't. It involved a clause in my contract that said that if Gaylord ever sold WTN, that they had to sell all or substantially all of the station, or I was free to leave. And that was the central issue behind the whole thing. What I didn't realize at the time was that there was a lot of the radio industry watching this. You know, I can remember Paul Feinbaum, who I didn't really know all that well at the time, called me and said, could you meet me for lunch in Birmingham? Well, hell, I didn't have anything to do. You know, I was off the air. And so I met him one day in Birmingham. We sat in one of these, booths. And I remember I looked at him and I said, are we going to get shot? and Paul was sort of facing some of the same issues, and he wanted to know what he was getting into. And, I look back on it. It was a pretty gutsy thing. I'm not saying it was the smart thing, but I'm certainly not saying it was the wrong thing.
February 2006, when did you start realizing you're having difficulties with your voice? How did it manifest itself?
Well, the day before, it was in March, actually, and why I remember this, I have no idea, but Tennessee and Vanderbilt were going to close out the SEC regular season on Saturday at Memorial Gym. And a classmate of mine from BGA was coming to the game who lives in Oak Ridge. And I was really geeked up about that. But the day before, I was having all kinds of trouble. Really couldn't talk very well. And by Saturday, I was like, something's not right here. And this went on for about a week. And initially, I was not going to be able to get into a voice clinic for close to a month. And a call was put in to Gordon Gee, and suddenly the Vanderbilt Voice Clinic saw me the next morning. And Pogue,
it's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
Well, it was in that case.
Yeah.
And, I remember they put this big scope thing down my throat, and it scared the hell out of me. But you could look at a TV monitor, and they could pretty much show you what was going on. And what it was a polyp on a vocal cord, and they decided that that rest, when they found out what my schedule was, the doctor was like, what did you expect? Because at the time, I'd been doing Titan pre- and post-game. I was doing Georgia Tech football on a TV package. I was doing my show 5 days a week, and the doctor looked at me and he was like, get a clue. This isn't going to work. The best thing that came out of it was the folks at Citadel, Judy Ellis, Steve Dickert, the entire group, made it very clear to me, there is no pressure on you. You come back when you're well, when the doctors say you're well. I mean, there was this big phone call between Judy Ellis, Steve Dickert, and the doctors treating me. And that was fabulous. I mean, that Citadel treated me as good as any employee of a radio station has ever been treated.
Was it benign, the polyp? Or?
I guess.
Yeah. How scared were you?
I was really scared. And I'll tell you where I got really scared was about a month and a half into it. I'm doing these voice exercises, and it wasn't getting any better, or at least I didn't think it was getting any better. And I called the therapist that was working with me, Amy Stone, and I said, this isn't working. And she said, you're a lot closer to well than you would know. And I remember exactly the first time that it started to get better. You ever heard the song from Elvin Bishop, Fooled Around and Fell in Love? I love that song. It comes on, and I decide to test it. And all of a sudden, it's working. And, it was, I don't know, a couple of weeks later that everybody agreed, okay, you can go back on the air for an hour at a time and we'll slowly build it up. But heck yeah, I was scared.
By the way, Mickey Thomas was the lead singer on that Elvin Bishop song, who later became lead singer of Jefferson Starship.
Every time I hear that song, and I hear it a lot, that's the first thing I think of.
101 with George Plaster, presented by Freeman Webb. We are at Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. We'll take a break, and we've got to talk about Vanderbilt and some things that might have happened over there back in the day. Coming up next, right here, 94.9 The Fan. Welcome back in, 101 with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb. Roy's Meat Service, East Nashville. Every Saturday morning guest is George Plaster, the Plaz. In your garage, how many cases of your bobblehead do you still have?
I think we're about out. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's a good thing for society. It's funny when it was in 2006, and I'm trying to think all the details of it. But anyway, when I got approached about it, I was like, not no, but hell no. We're not doing that. Well, why not? And so we came to an agreement that I got to see it and approve it before it actually got out there. And the first go-round of it, the hair didn't look right at all.
But, I mean, George, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken poop.
And some people said that. I will say that it's a much thinner version of me. We had more fun the night that we did this thing.
At the Sounds.
At Old Greer Stadium, they had the Budweiser deck. And, I've got pictures somewhere. Mayor Dean showed up. I must have signed 500 of those things. And I would ask every person, why do you even want this? Nobody had a good answer.
I had one, but I think you didn't have your right arm was missing.
I mean,
there's
paraplegic, George.
Yes.
Thank you.
Your father, Tom. There's no words to describe that man, but his friendship with the legendary Larry Munson. Talk about that.
I don't really know a lot about how they became friends, other than Dad would call on people at he worked for American Airlines, and so this was before you just went on the internet and ordered your tickets. If you wanted to go somewhere, you kind of had to go through him, probably by default. And Dad had the gift of gab, and he and Larry Munson became big buddies. And, till the day Larry Munson died, they talked all the time. And, it was pretty cool. I don't think Larry Munson ever knew my first name, but it was always Young Plaster. And, wow, what a character Larry Munson was.
And a lot of people don't realize he lived here for several years, right, to be near his grandkids.
So I'm going to give you a Mid-South exclusive
Uh-oh.
that nobody has ever heard. So in early 1995, I believe, although I can't prove it, that Larry Munson and Vince Dooley got into it over money. And Larry Munson basically told Vince Dooley, screw you, I'm leaving. Let's see how this plays out. And what nobody knew was he had moved back to Nashville. I run into him one day at the Green Hills Y. He's on a treadmill. I'm on one. I look down and I'm like, what is he doing here? So I go see him. He doesn't really give me much of an answer. But I later found out that Paul Houlihan tried to rehire Larry Munson as Vanderbilt's play-by-play announcer. Now, clearly, Munson was as good as it gets, and that would have been a terrific hire. They settled for somebody else later after Munson turned them down. That somebody was me.
I don't think I knew that story.
I don't think anybody's known that story.
Yeah.
What's interesting about it was...
So they could have had Larry Munson and hired you, is what I'm hearing?
Well, Munson turned him down. What was interesting was I got the information to Bob Horner that Munson was in town, and here's what I suspect is going on. Munson then calls his counterparts at Georgia, finds out some info. This was the first they knew of where Larry Munson was. And, I don't know how that would have played out, but Larry Munson was such an amazing broadcaster, even into his 80s. I remember I was doing a Georgia Tech game at Virginia, and I'm driving home from Charlottesville, and I'm listening to his broadcast of a night game. And I called him a couple of days later, and I said, at 84 years old, you've still got it. And I said, you are amazing. You are so fun to listen to. Because his style was different than virtually anybody else's. He was, whatever unique is, he was unique.
Well, and he was one of, in my mind, the very few that could get away with being a fan. A wee guy. He could pull it off.
I will always say that he's the greatest broadcaster that ever came out of this city. And, if you get some tapes and hear him, you'll know what I mean.
George Plaster with us, one-on-one with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. You're Greek? Did I understand this correctly?
Yes. Greek Orthodox is very similar to Catholic.
Uh-huh.
There are a few more Greek words. But, yeah.
Is it like Demetria Kalodimos, Chris Clark, and you? Was that the media triumvirate of the Greek world in our city?
Well, I don't know that anybody knew it back then. Chris, whose real name was Botsaris, back in that day, a lot of the broadcasters would change their name, and I never really understood that. And I remember somebody wanted me to do it, and I was like, hell no, that ain't happening.
You ever thought what it might be?
My middle name is Thomas. This is George Thomas.
All right, the Mount Rushmore of broadcasters. In your mind, they don't have to be the best or the greatest, just your Mount Rushmore.
Oh, gosh. Al Michaels would be on it because I think his versatility is, unmatched. You think about listening to him in the early 80s. He was the Reds play-by-play announcer, left after 3 years, and then Marty Brennaman came along. I would put Dick Enberg in that same category. NBC legend, California Angel broadcaster, UCLA's guy during the John Wooden era. Wow. I think Jim Nance has probably earned a spot on there over a 30-some-odd year, test of time. Gosh. Different people have different preferences. I believe the best radio baseball guy I've ever heard was Jack Buck. When Jack Buck turned it on, there was nobody as good as Buck. And I know a lot of people say, well, what about Vin Scully? Well, we're splitting hairs. But I'll go with Jack Buck as a fourth.
Yep. I always like, and this will shock you, Bob Uecker.
Oh, God.
But he was
amazing.
But the thing is, maybe his shtick became a little too much, obviously, the movie and all of, just a bit outside. But he knew baseball. He was an entertainer, sure, all the things he did. But Bob Uecker, the late Bob Uecker, just passed away, and they're going to get a World Series for him this year.
I'll tell you a story about Uecker. Somehow my dad got him to speak in the early 70s to a civic club that Dad belonged to, and Dad took me to it. And honestly, I had no idea really because at that point, you couldn't really, he was part of an Atlanta Braves speakers bureau. And when you watch that movie and you learn that he ad-libbed that entire stuff. I mean, that's insane, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, Major League, obviously.
God, if I've watched that thing once, I've watched it 50 times.
Yeah, it's one of those you're scrolling through, you stop.
There's a great line he's got in there about Indians fans. If you've been paying attention to the tribe, and judging by the attendance figures, you haven't. I mean, he was brilliant. And if you watch some of his old Carson stuff, you know, he went on Johnny Carson like 100+ times. He was hilarious. What you talk about one of a kind. Man, it's your guy, Bob Uecker.
Yeah, and obviously the Brewers.
Yeah, don't be so sure about them.
No, hey, they're won the equivalent of the President's Trophy, the best record in baseball for the first time in franchise history. So yeah, let me have mine. You know,
and when you consider the budgetary constraints that they're under, what they have done is amazing. It really is.
Your Braves?
Yeah. So I'm pretty certain that Brian Snitker did not resign or retire on his own, and that pisses me off because I think he's earned the right to have been able to walk in and say, I want one more year. If we're healthy, this team's pretty good. And I don't believe he was allowed that. Now, I can't 100% prove it, but this is not my first rodeo, nor is it yours. To me, it will be one of four people. Mark DeRosa, who I'm told doesn't want the job. David Ross, who I think does want the job. Walt Weiss, Skip Schumacher. And in order of preference for me, DeRosa, who I know a little bit, I think he's a brilliant person. David Ross second, Walt Weiss third, Schumacher a distant fourth. It's interesting, former Vandy baseball player Ryan Flaherty's name has come up. I don't think he's getting it, but it's interesting that since he's retired that he's having that kind of impact to get his name in on something like this.
1-on-1 with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb, Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. More with the Plaz coming up. Welcome back in, 1-on-1 with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb at Roy's Meat Service in East Nashville. The official caterer for the Nashville Cats, and you, part of the media, have partaken, is that the word, partaken? Yes, in some of their food before.
Bunch of freeloaders.
Yes.
You want a freeloader story?
Yes.
So CM got on this kick about media and free food, and when he was the AD at Kentucky, we're going up there to play, and I mean, he is waiting for me. It's like he's hidden out somewhere. And he walks in, he goes, so what do you think about our food policy? And he had eliminated the free meal for media, but made it clear that popcorn was available. And what he was trying to do was stir up a bunch of crap with me, which he loved doing. And I said, Coach, I said, whatever your little policy is fine. I don't care. I said, but no human being in sports has gotten more freebies than you have. So don't be casting the first stone. And, of course, you know, we'd have a laugh over that. That was the beauty toward the end of my relationship with Coach Newton, was just the screwing with each other. Because the pranks we pulled on each other, nobody would believe.
You did an interview once with, there's this boxing promoter named Don King.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We got to hear that story.
So it was when the arena first opened in 1996. And lo and behold, there's going to be a boxing card. And Don King is going to be the promoter. But the week of the event, a bunch of the fighters pull out saying that they're not getting paid, blah, blah, blah. Bill Boner, the former mayor, calls me and says, would you like to have him on? Absolutely. The show that day was at Jonathan's on 21st Avenue because we were doing the Jan Van Bredikoff show right after that. Don King comes in, and I'm trying to say, why are all these problems happening? And he's not answering any questions. He's dodging it all. We go to the first break, and I used a line that my dad used. And that was a big mistake. I said, if BS were a football field, you're listening to the 50-yard line. And at that point, Don King used all of the magic words, all of the things that will now get you a $325,000 fine by the FCC. He used them all in a 30-second span. And the thing that was amazing was it was such a festive occasion. Jonathan's was packed. I mean, it was a cocktail party. People were having fun, and all of a sudden he unloads, and you could have heard a pin drop. And Willie told me the story that when it happened, that Jim Fike,
former Metro
James Harold Fike,
former Metro Parks chief,
and a great friend, turns to Willie. I'm going to try and clean this up, and he says, George has screwed up big time. And, it wasn't anything I was proud of because I should have been better than that. And I've taken the blame for it.
Do you know, though, that he was convicted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and spent 4 years in prison?
Yeah, and I
didn't know
that
if you knew
was the
that.
stupid part was I did know it. And Willie reminded me of something that I had forgotten, that when we came back out of the break, I'd already gotten a call from my general manager, Bob Meyer, saying, get him the hell off the air. And I said, Bob, it's not that easy. And so when we come back, I said to Don King, if you don't like the line of questioning, you are free to leave. And he chose to stay. It was, shall we say, tense.
Contentious,
yeah.
George Plaster with us. You like where Sports Talk Radio is today in general, not any specifics?
Man, it's so different. The people that are coming up in this business are never going to have the fun that I had. They're competing with podcasts, 100 million of them. In our heyday at 104.5, we had a 15 share, which meant that 15% of all the listeners to radio in Nashville were listening to our show. That could never happen now because it's all been so diluted that nobody can garner that kind of a share. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you're having to spend so much time in the social media world, which clearly I'm no expert, but I now know, I have a Twitter account and I know what live tweeting during a show is. But there's no way that the group coming out of college that's going to get in this business, they're never going to have the fun I had. No way.
How long are you going to do this?
Until I'm 106.
Really?
No, I don't know.
Well, that's like 30 years?
Know. Yeah. No, come on. I don't know. I mean,
are you still having fun?
Yeah.
All right, because you just talked about fun. Are you still having fun?
On days where it works right, it's a blast. It's still fun to talk to people. It's still fun to discuss issues. I guess I didn't know it when I was coming out of school because there's still this play-by-play part of me that's out there that I really haven't used in a while. And I had an opportunity. This has been about 10 years ago. If I had said yes, I would have been Georgia Tech's radio play-by-play announcer. And I decided that Nashville was more important to me than that. And so that sort of solidified, you're a sports talk show host. That's what you are. Deal with it.
1-on-1 with Greg Pogue, presented by Freeman Webb, Roy's Meat Service, East Nashville, George Plaster. Our guest this morning, let's go around the horn. Vanderbilt Vanderbilt football, 5-0, Alabama. I wouldn't surprise me if they went down there and won, and I can't believe I'm forming my mouth to say that.
Shocked. In my wildest dreams, I never thought Vanderbilt football could ever get to this point. I don't pretend to know all of what Clark has done, all the buttons he's pushed, but it's time for him to start getting some real credit, like SEC Coach of the Year kind of credit. And, I would contend that there are not 5% of coaches in the country that could have taken that job 5 years ago and get it to where it is right now.
And it seems to be sustainable. Now, you're not going to have a Pavia come through or Eli Stowers come through.
That's the part I'm not as sure about.
Well, they in a debate, I think they were slow to the NIL world, okay? Yep. Now they're catching up. It's that selective poverty, my saying I had back in the day at Vanderbilt as selective poverty. We don't have any money on one hand, they go buy the Legends golf course on the other. So I think they were slow to the party. I think in the NIL era, you can compete as a Vanderbilt even in the SEC, and I think that's maybe the only way they can.
So privately, and I have no info to base this on, I think they've got a bunch of rich alums. I'm not one of them, but I think they have been able to target some really rich alums, in particular in the state of Texas, and they have gone to town. And then Clark and his group have allotted that money in different ways. Pogue, I would contend, when I watch them, their offensive line looks bigger than I have ever seen it. On defense, they're rotating more people in and out, and their second and third units are not nearly as bad as they used to be. And if they have any chance at Alabama, that's going to play into it. 85-degree day, 2:30 in the afternoon, and you better have depth on defense. And I think there's a chance they do.
Who's leading the underdog picks?
I am.
Did you take the lead from me? Of course, every Thursday at 4 o'clock, plug it.
Here are the standings.
So we got a couple more minutes.
On 94.9, I have 19.5 points by virtue of Illinois' last-second field goal against USC. In second place now is the General.
What?
He's at 14.5 points after his Oregon victory at Penn State. You are third. Congratulations. That's where you belong as a bronze medalist. You had Syracuse last week, and they lost 38-3, and you will be hearing about that this
afternoon. I
understand.
And Kelly?
Well, Kelly is,
and
I
then
hate
you
to
got
say this.
Kelly's
dead last.
And then Chuck McDowell.
No, Chuck's in fourth place.
Fourth place.
And Kelly is a distant fifth, and I love it.
Well, I'll deflect to that.
Yeah, whatever.
All right. Plug your show Monday through Friday.
We're on 94.9.
This is where we are now.
George Plaster, Kelly Holcomb, Parker Kelly. The three of us do 3 to 5 p.m. every day. We got great guests. Tony Basilio, David Cutcliffe, Danny Evans, Mike Organ, Clark Lee's on every week, Watson Brown. We do this right. And, if you want to hear sports talk the right way, tune us in.
Thanks for doing this, George.
Oh, absolutely. Do I get paid?
Yeah, you get a T-bone steak now.
Probably not.
All right. Hey, thanks for everybody for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.